Sahana vavatu, sahano bhunaktu, sahaviryam karavavahai, tejasvinavadi samastumavid vishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Welcome everyone. So nice to see you all. Today's talk is the path of surrender. And there's a feeling that I get when I sit down on my cushion to meditate, which is that I'm not doing anything. Sure, I've made a point to sit. I've arranged my body into a upright, comfortable, but alert posture. I've positioned my hands into the cosmic mudra, left hand cradled and right, thumbs lightly touching. And my eyes are either closed or half open and cast down with a soft gaze. Those are all some of the things I'm doing, or I guess my body is doing. And with my mind, I'm doing some stuff too. I'm monitoring it. I'm noticing when thoughts come in, and I'm just observing them. I'm not clinging to them or pushing them away. I'm watching my mind as my thoughts and emotions arise and dissipate. But on a fundamental level, I don't really feel like I'm doing anything. The body is still, the lungs breathe, the heart beats, and I'm just there with all of it. The sense of rest in that experience is beyond anything else I've ever experienced. And for me, this is part of what it is to surrender, to let myself go, to let everything rest for a little while, to just be. Surrender is to be without the agenda of the little self, with its wants and demands and aversions. Those wants and demands and aversions are there when I sit, sometimes, of course, but usually at enough of a remove that they cease to have a hold on me just for a little while. And then I can be just as I am, as Ramana Maharshi said, just be as you are. Nowhere to go, nothing to do. Like the famous Basho poem, sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes and the grass grows by itself. Or like Ryokan's death poem, what legacy shall I leave behind? Flowers in spring, cuckoos in summer, maple leaves in autumn. This is all surrender. Surrender feels to me like the very heart of the spiritual path. We let go of our little selves and all the demands and burdens that come with having a little self, and we just let things be as they are. As William Blake put it in those famous lines made more popular by the Doors, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. Cleansing the doors of perception in a way means to let go of our limited view, our understanding that's filtered through our limited ways of seeing the world. It's our limited perception that causes the infinite world to appear finite to us in so many ways, finite and thus full of suffering. Through the practice of zazen, of sitting meditation, one surrenders to the moment, to life, to the divine, to reality as it is. And we discover that nothing actually needs to change. As Zen Master Dogen put it, the whole universe throughout all its 10 directions is one bright pearl. The whole universe throughout all its 10 directions is one bright pearl. So today I want to talk about surrender and how it plays out across the spiritual path, starting from the very call to practice itself to the threefold training of Buddhism: Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna, ethical conduct, one-pointed concentration, and wisdom. So a few days after I sat my first sesshin, which is a 5-day silent retreat in Zen, almost 10 years ago now, I read this little story in a collection of writings from Dogen, the Zen master who began the lineage of Soto Zen, which is the one in which I practice. And I actually ended the first talk that I gave here with this story, and I wanted to start this one with it. So I'll read it to you here now. One day, Dogen said, "While I was reading the recorded sayings of an ancient master in a monastery in China, a monk from Shu who was practicing the way said, 'What's the use of reading such a book?' I said, 'I want to study the deeds of the ancient masters.' He said, 'What's the use of that?' I said, 'I hope to guide people when I go home.' He said, 'What's the use of that?' I said, 'To benefit beings.' He said, 'Ultimately, what's the use of that?' Later, I thought about the meaning of his questions. I realized that reading recorded sayings and koans, studying the deeds of ancient masters, and explaining them to the deluded are of no use for one's own development or in helping others. If you practice just sitting and clarify the great matter, the essential meaning, your understanding becomes unlimited in guiding others, even if you don't know a single letter. That is why the monk said, 'Ultimately, what's the use of that?' Realizing he was right to the point, I stopped reading recorded sayings and other texts. I sat wholeheartedly and clarified the great matter." So when I read this, I really took this to heart, maybe a little too much to heart, because that story was at the beginning of this book called Beyond Thinking on Dogen's Teachings, and after I read that, I just closed the book, and I still haven't actually read it, so that might have been a little excessive. But what I really took to heart was that last line. Realizing he was right to the point, I stopped reading recorded sayings and other texts. I sat wholeheartedly and clarified the great matter. What does it mean, clarifying the great matter? It is the great matter of life and death. On the wooden board called the Han that we strike to call the community to meditation in Zen monasteries, there are 4 Chinese characters which are often written: life, death, great matter. And the evening gatha, which is chanted at the end of the day in Zen monasteries, is the following: great is the matter of birth and death. All is impermanent, quickly passing. Awake, awake. Don't waste this precious life. Or the version that I'm most familiar with: let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly and opportunity is lost. Let us awaken, awaken, take heed. Do not squander your life. This sentiment isn't just in Zen. You'll find it in the very foundation of Vedantic thought, the Upanishads. Swami Vivekananda's famous line, "Arise, awake, and stop not until the goal is reached," was inspired by a verse from the Katha Upanishad, where the child Nachiketa is asking the god of death, Yama, about the secret of death. And at one point, Yama tells him, "Arise, awake, approach the great and learn. Approach the sages and learn." So all of this to say, in Zen, in Vedanta, we are exhorted to take advantage of this precious opportunity of a human birth. To do what? To sit wholeheartedly and clarify the great matter. To arise, awake, and stop not until the goal is reached. To see the truth of life for what it really is. And what's startling, or maybe not so startling, but very interesting, is that the mystical sects of all the world religions, Sufism and Islam, Zen and Buddhism, Vedanta and Hinduism, Kabbalah and Judaism, Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart, all of their descriptions of this great matter, or the truth of life as it really is, they all sound very similar. Despite vast differences in dogma and aesthetics and geography in these regions, the practitioners who took the path of direct experience in all these different traditions ended up describing the non-dual in deeply similar ways. And they all point to this non-dual awakening as the ultimate purpose of human life, to awaken to this reality. The trouble with seeing the non-dual reality is, well, duality. It's pretty straightforward. We see the world as subject and object, as me and you as two, well, many more than two. And the me of that me and you that we see is the mind, our ego, our little self, our personality, however you want to call it. All different ways of talking about whatever it is that we believe ourselves to be. Me, Raka, this person with this shape and these thoughts and emotions and memories and history. And this idea that I have of myself, that this is myself, this is what I have to surrender. Because Zen and Vedanta both tell us that this person is not, in the ultimate sense, real. That there is no solid, separate being that is me, that is separate from everything else. It might seem a little strange at first, like, of course I'm here and not the same as you. But isn't it also strange that the me that's here today was also the me that was once a teenager and a child and an infant? I certainly look pretty different. Many of you here remember me at all those stages. I think you can confirm that I look pretty different. I actually have less hair now than I did when I was an infant, but my feeling is still of being the same me. That has persisted throughout all these very different changes. So my body is different. My thoughts and emotions are always changing, hour to hour, minute to minute. There is a certain pattern in the kinds of thoughts that I tend to have, but I can't stake myself on something that changeable as thoughts and feelings. I've also forgotten a lot of things in my life already, so I can't be my memories, right? Because my sense of being me is still intact, even though I've forgotten most of my life at this point. And what's even more amazing is that even that sense of I, like I'm doing this, even that vanishes. We have this experience just in normal daily life, like dancing or playing sports or getting lost in some aesthetic creation. Even that sense of I am dancing vanishes. And yet something is still here. Something persists in the midst of this constant change. You could call it consciousness, the witness, the eternal subject. Vedanta defines the real as that which does not change, which we call Brahman, which literally translates to the vast. And in Zen, there's a chant called the Song of the Jewel Mirror Awareness, or Jewel Mirror Samadhi, where there's a line, when delusions disappear, the natural mind reveals itself. The natural mind, or Buddha nature, Brahman, all of these are words, but they're pointing at something beyond concepts, something beyond our experience of the relative world, our true nature. In the Heart Sutra, which is chanted at Zen monasteries around the world, the closing mantra is Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi, Swaha. Translates roughly to gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely beyond awakening. So we are called to go beyond, to go deeper, to really investigate what is at the heart of this life. And in doing so, what we're really called to do is to surrender this little self, this unreal self, to the real, the natural mind, the vast. How do we do this? So in Buddhism, we are taught about the threefold training: Sila, Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. Or in other words, ethical conduct, one-pointed concentration, and wisdom. The entire Eightfold Path, you've probably heard of the Eightfold Path of Buddhism, but it actually fits within this threefold training. So Shila, or ethical conduct, contains right speech, right action, right livelihood. Samadhi, or one-pointed concentration, contains right effort, right meditation, right concentration. And Prajna, wisdom, contains right view and right intention. So let's start with Shila, ethical conduct. My sense is that this aspect of the practice is often overlooked in the way that Zen has been taught in the West, because the focus is on sitting meditation, or zazen, which is critical, of course. But if you're going out in the world and when you're off the cushion, you're engaging in all sorts of crazy behavior, hurting people, stealing, lying, there's just no way that this won't affect your ability to sit quietly on the cushion and meditate. The mind is deeply affected by how we behave and what we consume. Sometimes I think there's an idea that things just go in and out of the mind and don't leave a trace. But the mind is just as affected by what we consume as the body is. And you wouldn't think that you could just sit all day and eat junk food and have your body be unaffected. And similarly, you can't sit all day and just watch TikTok or true crime videos and have your mind be unaffected. It sort of soaks it up in this way. And not to blame anyone who likes TikTok or true crime, it's very popular. It's just a fact that your mind is deeply influenced by the food that you give it in terms of sensory stimulus. Which is why in Buddhism and in Vedanta, there's such an emphasis on the importance of holy company and spiritual friendship, kalyana mitra. We're social creatures, and we're very influenced by the people around us, and the people around us play also a huge role in the kind of sensory stimulus that we take in. If all your friends are watching true crime videos, you'll probably find yourself watching them too. And if all your friends are super into meditation, then you'll probably find yourself meditating too. We're essentially teenagers, I guess. So we might as well use that to our advantage, to keep company with the kind of people who inspire us by the way that they live our life, but the way they live their life, the way that they are in the world. In Zen, Shila, or ethical conduct, is supported by receiving the 10 grave precepts. Not killing, not stealing, chaste conduct, not lying, not being intoxicated, not speaking of others' faults and errors, not elevating oneself and blaming others, not being stingy, not being angry, and not disparaging the 3 treasures of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Those are the 10 precepts. So lay practitioners, if you go through Jukai, the ceremony where you sew this little robe, you receive these precepts. If you're ordained as a novice, you receive these same precepts. If you're later given Dharma transmission, you receive these same precepts. We're always cycling back to these same precepts. Every full moon, there's also a ceremony called Fusatsu, where we prostrate ourselves and atone for falling off the path, and once again vow to maintain the precepts. This atonement is also a really important part of ethical conduct. We don't talk about atonement that often in normal life, but we fall off the path over and over when we vow to maintain these precepts. So we atone for our mistakes and we renew our vows. Every morning, the chant of verse of atonement that I do is, all my ancient twisted karma, from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, born of body, speech, and mind, I now fully atone. Because we have bodies and minds, because we like some things and we don't like other things, because we have ancient twisted karma or past samskaras, past impressions from this life or previous lives that influence our current actions. Because of all of that, we keep falling off the path. It's okay. We just atone once again and we renew our vows to maintain the precepts. The precepts aren't meant to be like another cudgel to wield against yourself, right? Especially for those of us who are more prone to self-hatred or negative self-talk. It's not like another tool for your superego to have another thing to hold over you. You don't even have to keep the precepts at all, but if you do, you tend to find that things go more smoothly. There's many reasons for the precepts, but one of the biggest reasons for keeping the precepts is that they help to calm the mind. I'm thinking about times when I've taken something that wasn't mine to take, or times when you tell a little lie to get out of going to some boring event, or you lose your temper and you say something in anger. All of these things agitate the mind. Every single one of those 10 grave precepts is a prohibition against doing things that agitate the mind, that stir up the little self. After all, once you've told a little white lie that you're sick in order to get out of going to something, and then the person who invited you, you run into them and they're like, oh, are you feeling better now? And then you have to lie again. That feels bad, right? It just stirs up the mind. Or maybe you find yourself speaking about someone's faults and errors, and then later you run into that person and suddenly you feel awkward, like, oh, maybe they know what I said, and again, it feels bad. It stirs up the mind. And these things aren't things to avoid because they're inherently evil or wrong. They're things to avoid because of all of the stirring. They stir up the mind in unpleasant ways, and all of that stirring basically makes it impossible to sit quietly and meditate. There's another important reason why we observe the precepts. It's because they show us what life looks like from the enlightened perspective, from right view. From the view on the top of the mountain, from the non-dual. Why would we kill? What is there to steal? Why would we need to pursue others for our own satisfaction or become intoxicated to dull our mind to our suffering? If we're living life from this higher understanding that all of these manifestations are just like waves on the ocean, right? That ultimately there's nothing but water. What need do we have for engaging in any of these behaviors? Why would one wave get mad at another wave or lie to another wave? Like, it just doesn't make sense, right? When you live your life from that place, you won't break the precepts because it just doesn't make sense. So this is why it's not about adding some additional layer of morality to our lives to tighten our superego straitjacket even tighter. Please don't do that. Please don't take that away from this section. Living life according to the precepts is just what non-dual realization looks like from the side of the relative. It's nothing special. It's just life lived from a more expansive understanding of who we really are. And until we get there, we try our best and we give ourselves grace for not having gotten there yet. We surrender. Wherever we are, it's okay. Even falling off the path is the path. And that too is surrender. Okay, so that's Shila, ethical conduct. It's the foundation for how we show up in the world, how we show up to ourselves and to others, how we show up to our practice. Next is samadhi, or one-pointed concentration. Concentration is one of the things that I feel is most under attack in our world today. Right, we have these tiny portals in our pockets. I don't have mine on me now, thank God, that contain all of the world's information. And then they express it to us with bright, shiny colors, and they buzz, and they ping, and they light up whenever they have something to say to us, which is constantly. It's like a complete nightmare for concentration, for the cultivation of concentration. I can't think of anything could be designed that would be worse. There's even something called the phone proximity effect. Have you heard of this? Where there's research that's found that even having your phone nearby, face down, on silent, but on your desk, reduces your cognitive capacity. People are not able to perform as well on cognitive tasks. So your phone is literally taking up your mental resources even when you're not looking at it. It's just so alarming. And if you're wondering why I brought up samadhi and now I'm talking about phones, there's a direct link, right? It's impossible to do anything in life without concentration. One of the biggest advantages of engaging in ethical conduct, as I was saying, is that it helps aid our concentration by eliminating that hindrance of mental disturbance that stirs up the mind. But if we're doing our best to follow the precepts, maintain ethical conduct, but then we're living our lives with our phones constantly within a 1-foot radius of our bodies, just sort of like an extra appendage, right? We haven't really given ourselves that much of a leg up with all the ethical conduct, right? I've almost started thinking about my phone like the One Ring the Dark Lord Sauron. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. It's like a little too resonant. It's a little too similar for me. So one-pointed concentration, samadhi, the practice of Raja Yoga, this is one of the paths to enlightenment, to realization. Concentration by itself can open that door. All of the mystical sides of the world's religions that I was mentioning before, they all emphasize direct experience of the divine. How? Through concentration. I'm not saying that you just like squeeze your mind really hard and then you just see God, right? As the Holy Mother said, right? Is God like a fish that you can just go out and buy at the market? I'm not saying that. But countless sages across time and space have found that if you set aside external distraction, like our phones, and we turn the mind inwards, there is something that can happen that can utterly transform your lived reality. So how do we get there? Dogen, Zen Master Dogen, has these instructions for sitting meditation for Zazen called the Fukan Zazengi. And the guidance is relatively simple. Find a place that is neither too hot nor too cold. Spread a mat down, set a cushion on top of it. Take a posture that is steady, stable, upright. And then think, not thinking. How do we do that? Non-thinking. This is why Dogen isn't everyone's cup of tea. It's like, think, not thinking. How? Non-thinking. Oh, great. Super helpful. It's a very Zen instruction, right? Pointing the way without telling you directly, because it can't be said directly. How do you think not thinking? What is non-thinking? What does the mind do when it doesn't think? What happens when thought drops away? Dogen, in this kind of cute, I think it's cute, opaque way, encourages us to find out for ourselves. At least all the rest of it, though, is pretty straightforward. That's a little confusing, but the rest of it is pretty straightforward. Not too hot, not too cold, middle path, mat, cushion, got it, posture, okay, cool, non-thinking, let's go. And then the real trouble starts. What trouble? I couldn't possibly tell you, even if I wanted to, because we each have our own minds that are completely unique and highly skilled at creating their own particular brands of trouble. There's many versions of trouble in this room. My trouble will look different from your trouble, which will look different from his trouble. But best believe there will be trouble. The mind is tricksy, and it doesn't want you to see it. It's also shy. It's shy and tricksy, like Gollum. I guess I've started expounding the gospel according to the Lord of the Rings. But, okay, setting that aside. The mind conducts most of these tricks off-screen, like in the shadows. Right? When we start shining a light in that little cave, when we take the backward step and shine the light inward, like Dogen says, the mind gets nervous that we'll discover what it's been up to all this time. And what has it been up to? This is the bread and butter of psychoanalytic thought from Freud and beyond. What is the mind up to? Well, a big part of its work program, in terms of reference, is repression. Nope, don't want to look at that. That is way too painful. That is way too intense for us to bear. Just stuff it down. Don't even let her know that it's even there. Just shove it way down. Just hide it. Repression is a tough one because when the mind has successfully repressed something, we're not even aware that it's there. That's kind of the whole point. This is part of why psychoanalysts are so famous for being interested in dreams, because when you're asleep, the part of your mind that it's been keeping a tight lid on everything loses its grip, and all sorts of weird things start to bubble up, often in some kind of unusual and symbolized form. and often strange enough to make you stop and go, huh, if you pay enough attention. But repression is just the tip of the iceberg. There's denial, projection, displacement, regression, reaction formation, identification, rationalization. So many different highly effective techniques that the mind uses to keep us from being aware of our own motivations, keep everything running smoothly. Why does the mind do these things? In short, I think it's because it's trying to protect us from something that is unbearable. That's why these are all called defense mechanisms, right? The mind is basically just trying to do its best to protect us, to deal with all of these double binds that we put on it. I had the image of like a child who's been given too much responsibility without the necessary skills. Like she's been told to clean the kitchen, but she doesn't know how to run the dishwasher, so she just takes all the dirty dishes and just puts them in the back porch, closes the door, and calls it good. That's basically repression. Just put it over there. And these binds, these double binds, they often come up for us when we try to engage in Shila, ethical conduct. Right, we know that one of the 10 grave precepts is not to be angry. And we are also upset with our partner for drinking the last sparkling water, but leaving the empty box in the fridge as a tempting mirage. This is a purely hypothetical example, not from my true life whatsoever. So the mind is in a bind, right? On the one hand, we're angry. On the other hand, we're not supposed to be angry. So we practice a little displacement. We try to ignore our anger at our partner, and we take it out on the poor pots and pans while we're doing dishes instead. Or we didn't clean the bathroom like we were supposed to. Again, purely hypothetical. And we feel ashamed. So when our partner brings it up, we accuse them of trying to shame us and make us feel bad. We can't bear our own shame, so we practice a little projection. We project the shaming onto the partner, believing that they're the one shaming us, which allows us then to feel righteously hurt rather than taking accountability for our own mistakes and lapses. Okay, so how do defense mechanisms and the tricksy golem-like mind and household chores, how do these relate to samadhi, or one-pointed concentration? It's because I think that these defense mechanisms are actually some of the biggest hindrances to being able to actually get ourselves to sit down quietly and practice meditation. Even when we attempt to practice ethical conduct, like I was saying, these defense mechanisms are often making things more difficult for us by hiding our true actions and motivations from our view. And thus the mind gets stirred up despite our best efforts. So when we sit down to meditate, the mind is engaged in a tug of war, like, he drank the last sparkling water and left the empty box in the fridge again. Don't be angry. It's bad to be angry. You'll never get enlightened at this rate. I don't care. I wanted that sparkling water. This is what I meant by best believe there will be trouble, right? When you sit down to meditate, whatever tricks that your mind gets up to will come out in full force. And it's often helpful to have some idea of what to look out for, so that rather than being just haplessly swept along, we can start to step back and just observe the mind at work. And this process of simply becoming aware of what your mind is up to while you're sitting on the cushion is transformative, because it too is a form of surrender, back to surrender. Right? Letting go of that tug of war and just seeing what's happening. And over time, just seeing what's happening, stepping back, seeing what's happening, it becomes a habit. And then you'll start noticing what your mind is up to when you're off the cushion as well. You'll start seeing the tug of war playing out in real time in your daily life, your lived life. You'll feel shame come up as you talk to your partner and think, wait, this is my shame. And this increased self-awareness will make it easier to show up ethically to your life. It starts to become a virtuous circle, showing up ethically to your life, which makes it easier to show up wholeheartedly to your meditation practice. And this too is surrender, being able to let down these defenses and slowly bear what was previously unbearable, to see more clearly. All of this observing and quiet awareness helps the mind to settle down, to become concentrated, and eventually, really, to think not thinking, non-thinking, to reach a point of such quietude that thoughts drop away, that the feeling of being embodied, of being a body, that drops away, that the feeling of being a single, cohesive self drops away. And there's just experience. And when there's just experience, something miraculous happens. I've said it before in previous talks, there's this realization that nothing is missing. Even when we're saddled with this human body and the human mind, which undergoes so much physical and psychological suffering, there can be an experience of a total lack of lack, that everything is fundamentally okay, nothing is missing. It's hard to explain. Even the questions drop away, and you're left with nothing but just the miracle of existence, Satchitananda, as we say in Vedanta. Existence, consciousness, bliss. Repeatedly accessing this state of mind, experiencing life as it is, without constructing a whole layer of narratives and stories on top of it, like we normally do. This experience of one-pointed concentration is joyful in and of itself. That's why Dogen called Zazen the Dharma gate of joy and ease. But it's not joy and ease in and of itself alone. It also brings insight, deep insight into the nature of our reality, and especially the truth of non-duality. This is what is meant by that third aspect of the threefold training, prajna, or wisdom. There really are no boundaries at the edges of things. The world is not actually full of these objects that our minds have populated it with. There is just life in its unimaginable, incomprehensible wildness, continuously unfolding beyond conception. We confine it into the bonds of time and space and causality, what we call Maya and Vedanta. We try to put a box around it so that we aren't just insanely overwhelmed by the complete non-graspability of what we actually face, of what we actually are. It's easier this way, right? It's easier to interact with a world full of concepts that we've made up, a world of name and form. It's easier to interact with these little boxes than it is to interact with life as it is, in all its mystery and boundaryless vastness. But the problem is that we've gotten too used to our boxes. We've made the world small. We've made ourselves small. We've separated ourselves from each other. We isolate ourselves from life, and so we suffer. But somehow, through Shila and Samadhi, through ethical conduct and one-pointed concentration, insight can arise for us. We can just simply experience the nature of things. And to this little self, it then feels like an incomprehensible but completely unmistakable sense of okayness, that nothing is missing. So, Sila, Samadhi, Prajna. Every step is shot through with surrender. Surrender is shot through the very heart of every step we take on the spiritual path. Sooner or later, no matter how disciplined or talented or stoic or determined we are, we will learn, we must learn that we cannot do this alone. We wrestle with the mind and it overpowers us time and again. We try to engage in ethical conduct and we fall off the path. We come up with excuses why we can't meditate, or we go the opposite route and try to meditate too hard, just torturing ourselves with physical pain and marinating in negative self-talk. I think Zen in particular can lead people to take on a very hard-edged, sort of stoic approach to spiritual practice. I'll sit in full lotus and I won't move for 10 hours. I'll sit all night. But that hardness and rigidity is not the way. We have to make our own efforts, of course. We have to try. But the goal has never been to harden ourselves against the world. Or sometimes in Vedanta, people read in the Upanishads that the self, the capital S self, the true self, is unmoved by heat or cold, praise or blame, pleasure or pain. And so they think that this is something for the little self to aspire to. But that's not the path for the little self. The little self is certainly moved by heat or cold and pleasure and pain. We're not trying to become insensate, unmoved by the grief and suffering of the world. That description is true of the eternal subject, the witness consciousness, Buddha nature. Buddha nature is not moved by heat or cold, praise or blame. But as long as we think of ourselves as our minds and bodies and personalities, we are. So what I'm trying to say here is that stoicism is not the way. Being impossibly disciplined and never taking a single step off the path is also not the way. The way is to soften. The path is surrender. This path, I think, is not ultimately taken through our own self-power. It's called jiriki in Zen. Instead, it's tariki, other power. Sri Ramakrishna often said, bhakti, the path of devotion, is the easiest and best path. Similarly, tariki, or other power, is considered the easier path between Zen and Pure Land Buddhism. In Pure Land Buddhism, the practice is to entrust ourselves completely to Amitabha Buddha. So we can surrender to God, we can surrender to Buddha nature, we can surrender to Amitabha Buddha, we can surrender to nature or to life or to mystery. It doesn't matter how you conceive of it, it's the vast. Just can be like, let go and let God, right? Or Jesus take the wheel. Right? All of that is surrender. And I think one of the most fundamental things that you learn on the spiritual path is that we cannot do it alone. So for Shila, ethical conduct, we try our best and we surrender. Samadhi, one-pointed concentration, we try our best and we surrender. And prajna, wisdom, well, that's a matter of surrender entirely, right? With Shila and Samadhi, I think we can fool ourselves for a little while into thinking that we can do it on our own. But prajna, there's no fooling ourselves about that. Like, insight either comes or it doesn't. It's purely a matter of grace. I want to close this talk with, I want to come back to Zen Master Dogen's words that I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this talk, that the whole universe throughout its 10 directions is one bright pearl. At the end of this teaching, Dogen says, what appears as our body and mind is and always has been the bright pearl. Hence, the conscious mind is not what we are. So who is it that arises and passes away? Why worry yourself over whether or not something is the bright pearl? Even if you are perplexed as you grope along, Do not think that this is not the bright pearl, since there is no action or thought that can be generated that is not of the bright pearl. Even your going back and forth in and out of the demon's cave within the Black Mountains is nothing other than the one bright pearl. He's saying, in essence, the most liberating of things. Even if you are perplexed as you grope along, do not think that this is not the bright pearl. You can't fall off the path. Everything you do is the path. Even, as he says, even going in and out of the demon's cave within the Black Mountains, or in other words, being caught in the grip of ignorance time and again. This too is the path. This too is the one bright pearl. He says, what appears as our body and mind is and always has been the bright pearl. He's saying what you are is what you are seeking. All you have to do is let go. In other words, surrender. Why worry yourself over whether or not something is the bright pearl? Let go, let go, let go, let go. Give yourself over to the world. Surrender to the divine. What appears as our body and mind is and always has been the bright pearl. Thank you. Let's see. Questions? I think we can take any questions downstairs. There's some tea and coffee and snacks. So I'll just close with the chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Rama Krishna Arpanamastu. Om, peace, peace, peace to all beings.